I spotted a strange new friendship bracelet on my boyfriend's arm and lip gloss in his jacket. When I asked him about it, he snapped, "It's for my niece, stay out of it." I didn't say anything. That was 4 days ago. This morning, he won't stop sobbing about what I did to him. When I first started dating Theodore and everything felt amazing, I kept quiet about my dad being super wealthy. It wasn't that I expected him to cover all our dates, but my dad always warned me that guys are only after one thing with girls. Even so, we had the perfect relationship. We had the passwords to each other's everything, and he wanted to make sure that I always existed in my femininity, which meant he paid for everything and complimented every single meal I cooked for him, even when it came out a little burnt. But one day, he turned his Find My iPhone location off. I didn't mind too much, but I still confronted him because I hated leaving things unspoken. "Oh, so now a man can't even have any privacy? I do everything for you." His reaction was so uncanny that I immediately broke into tears. That's when he took a break from his yelling to hold me. "I'm sorry, baby. It's just been a tough day at work. I turned it off because I just wanted some independence." His words should have been comforting, but they weren't. Because he said them really fast, and the second I stopped crying, he returned to playing Call of Duty. So the next morning when he left for work, I called my dad. "Honey, I trust your instincts, but Theodore seems like a good guy," he said. That same day, Theodore never came home. When it was 1 a.m., I texted asking where he was, and responded saying he was on a work trip. What the F? I instantly knew something was wrong, but it was clear that he wasn't going to tell me the truth. So I just let him think that he had somehow gotten away with his lie. When he came home the next morning, he snuggled into bed beside me. It was obvious that he was exhausted. As soon as I heard him snoring, I shot up out of bed. On his wrist was a Claire's friendship bracelet, and sticking out of his pocket was a lip gloss from Justice. My eyebrows furrowed. Maybe he had run into his niece? None of it made sense. That evening, I served him his favorite meal and a glass of very strong whiskey. I waited until his eyes looked glossed over to ask him more questions. "So, did you get to see anyone while you were away?" I watched closely as his face strained for a second before answering. I guess I saw a girl. My niece, that is. Why do you ask?" My heart skipped a beat. His niece lives 2 states away. He's never mentioned her traveling, let alone visiting him randomly. "Oh, cool. Yeah, I saw the bracelet on your wrist." "Yeah, that was my niece's," he stuttered, and almost dropped his fork. Over the next few days, I regretted bringing it up, because it only helped him to get better at covering his tracks. One evening after eating dinner, he told me he was leaving to volunteer for the night shift at some faraway soup kitchen. "Theodore, in our 3-year relationship, you've never once mentioned anything to do with volunteering." "Well, I don't know. I just wanted it to be my thing, I guess," he rebutted. He then proceeded to actually send a link to the faraway soup kitchen in question. And when he was gone, he even sent photos of him working. Okay, so maybe I was just being paranoid. That's what I tried to tell myself. But unfortunately, just 12 hours later, it was disproven. Because when he came home and slept, I unpacked his backpack for him. I thought I was doing him a favor. But in the midst of his dirty socks, I found a drawing. It looked like it was done by a child, and it was a photo of him and what looked like a 10-year-old girl kissing on a bed together. At the bottom, it was signed with a heart and the name Lily. I've never heard him mention a Lily. Luckily, I didn't need to keep scheming, because that's when I got a text from my dad. It was a screenshot of Theodore making a booking at one of his Airbnb listings. Theodore had booked it for 4 days from then. It was a log cabin in the middle of nowhere, and he obviously didn't know my dad owned it because the next day he again told me about a work trip. And guess what? He lied about the location. But again, I played dumb. "Wow, honey, you work so hard. I love you." And that idiot ate it up. They always do. When the day came, I waited until 6 hours had passed since he left and drove to the log cabin. As I parked and sneaked my way to the window, I could feel my heart beating in my chest. That's when I saw it. Multiple 9-year-old girls completely unclothed with him. I immediately vomited into the grass beside me. I dug my nails into my palms so hard I saw red. It was one of those moments that no one prepares you for. My hands trembled as I tried to take a photo. I sent it to my dad and he replied straight away. He told me he was on his way and would be here in a few minutes. He showed up not even a minute later, and as soon as he got out, he turned to me, his face grim. "We need to get those girls out now. I called the police already, but we need to do it before they arrive in case he does something desperate. I nodded, my mouth dry with fear. We had to act fast. Dad motioned for me to go around to the back door while he took the front. I crept around the side of the cottage, keeping low beneath the windows. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. The back door was unlocked. I slipped inside as quietly as possible, finding myself in a small kitchen. I think Theodore heard us or something, because instantly I could hear Theodore in the front room, his voice frantic as he started barking orders at the girls. "Get your things! Move! We're leaving right now!" One of the girls appeared in the kitchen doorway. She froze when she saw me, her eyes wide with fear. She looked about 11, with dark braids and a Justice t-shirt that was way too big for her. "It's okay," I whispered, holding my finger to my lips. "I'm here to help you." She looked uncertain, glancing back toward Theodore's voice. I reached out my hand to her just as a crash came from the front room. Dad had made his move. I heard Theodore yell in surprise, followed by the sound of a struggle. The girl with braids ran to me then, grabbing my hand. "Please help my friends," she whispered. I nodded and moved toward the front room, the girl behind me. The scene was chaos. Dad had Theodore pinned against the wall, the baseball bat on the floor beside them. The other girls were huddled together on the couch, watching with wide eyes. "Get the girls out!" Dad shouted to me, struggling to keep Theodore under control. I rushed to the couch. "Come with me, quickly," I told the girls. "We're going to keep you safe." They hesitated for just a second before following me. I led them out the back door, the sirens getting louder now. Theodore was screaming threats behind us, his voice filled with rage. "You're dead! You hear me? You're dead! I'll find you!" I tried to block his words from the girls' ears as I hurried them toward our car. The oldest-looking girl, maybe 12, was helping the youngest, who couldn't stop crying. It broke my heart to see them so terrified. We reached the car just as the first police cruiser pulled up the driveway, lights flashing. 2 officers jumped out, hands on their weapons. I quickly explained who I was and pointed them toward the cottage. "My dad's inside, restraining him," I said, my voice shaking. "There are cameras set up showing everything." The officers nodded and rushed toward the cottage. I stayed with the girls, trying to comfort them as best I could. The one with braids told me her name was Zoe. The oldest was Mia, and the youngest, still crying, was Emma. The 4th girl, who hadn't spoken yet, was Lily, the same Lily from the drawing. Detective Martinez arrived about 10 minutes later with more officers and a social worker. They took the girls aside one by one to talk to them while I gave my statement. I watched as Dad emerged from the cottage, Theodore in handcuffs between 2 officers. Theodore locked eyes with me as they led him to a police car. His face was a mask of pure hatred. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I stood my ground, staring back at him until they put him in the car and drove away. The next few days were a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and meetings with prosecutors. This time, they assured us, Theodore wouldn't be getting out on bail. The evidence was overwhelming. The cameras had captured everything, and the girls were all willing to talk. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But Theodore had connections I never knew about. A week after his arrest, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello? You think you've won, don't you?" It was a woman's voice, unfamiliar and cold. "Who is this?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "A friend of Theodore's. He wanted me to let you know that he hasn't forgotten about you. None of us have." She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Detective Martinez, who told me to save the number and report any further contact. She assured me Theodore was still in custody, but that didn't make me feel much better. The calls kept coming, from different numbers each time. Sometimes it was the woman, sometimes other voices I didn't recognize. They never made direct threats, just vague comments about watching me, knowing where I lived, how Theodore had friends everywhere. Dad wanted me to stay at his house indefinitely, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. I needed to get back to my life. So I moved back to my apartment, but I took precautions. New locks, a security system, pepper spray by my bed. 3 days after moving back, I came home from work to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. I backed away immediately, called the police, and waited in my car until they arrived. The officers searched my place thoroughly. Nothing was stolen, but things had been moved around. My photos were turned face down. My clothes were rearranged in my closet. On my bathroom mirror, written in what looked like lipstick, were the words, "We see you." The police dusted for fingerprints but found nothing useful. They suggested it could be kids playing pranks, but I knew better. This was Theodore's friends sending a message. I moved back to Dad's house that night. The next day, I got a call from my boss, Kenneth. "Victoria, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to let you go." "What? Why?" I was stunned. Kenneth sounded uncomfortable. "There have been some complaints and concerns about your reliability given everything going on in your personal life." I later found out that someone had been calling my coworkers, spreading rumors about me having mental health issues, making up stories about Theodore. Some of my coworkers had even received emails with fake screenshots of conversations supposedly from me, saying horrible things about them. Theodore was systematically destroying my life from behind bars. I felt helpless, trapped, and increasingly isolated. The only people I could truly count on were Dad and Detective Martinez. Martinez suggested I document everything and stay vigilant. "He's trying to break you down," she explained, "make you too exhausted to follow through with testifying." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. As it approached, the intimidation tactics escalated. Dad's car tires were slashed. Dead flowers were delivered to his house. Someone created fake social media accounts in my name, posting disturbing content that made me look unstable. I was starting to crack under the pressure. One night, I broke down completely, sobbing in Dad's kitchen. "Maybe we should just drop it," I cried. "Move away, start over somewhere else." Dad sat beside me, putting his arm around my shoulders. "That's exactly what they want," he said gently. "If we run now, Theodore wins, and those girls don't get justice." He was right, of course, but knowing that didn't make it any easier to bear. 2 weeks before the hearing, I received a package at Dad's house. Inside was a USB drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop. It contained dozens of photos of me shopping, getting coffee, talking with friends. Some were taken through windows, some on the street, all recent, all showing I was being watched constantly. I called Martinez immediately. She came to collect the USB as evidence and promised to increase patrols around the house. But we all knew they couldn't watch us 24/7. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise downstairs, a soft click, like a door opening. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, a creak on the stairs. Someone was in the house. I grabbed my phone and the pepper spray, then locked myself in the bathroom, calling 911 in a whisper. The dispatcher told me to stay put, that officers were on their way. I heard footsteps in the hallway, moving slowly toward my room. Then Dad's voice, shouting. A thud, the sound of breaking glass. I wanted to run to him, but fear kept me frozen in place. More thuds, something heavy falling. Then silence. The police arrived minutes later, but it felt like hours. When they finally cleared the house and let me out of the bathroom, I found Dad in the hallway, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but otherwise okay. The intruder had fled when they heard the sirens. "I saw his face," Dad told the officers. "It wasn't Theodore. It was a younger guy, maybe early 20s. Never seen him before." The police found a knife dropped in the yard outside. Theodore was sending people to do his dirty work, people we wouldn't recognize. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe. Martinez suggested we go into temporary protective custody until the hearing. Dad agreed immediately, but I hesitated. If we disappear now, won't that just delay the hearing? That's what Theodore wants. Your safety comes first, Martinez insisted. We can arrange for secure transport to the courthouse when needed. So we went to a hotel under police protection, switching locations every few days. I felt like a prisoner, but at least we were safe. I used the time to prepare for my testimony, working with the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Josephine Reed. Theodore's lawyer will try to discredit you, Josephine warned me. They'll bring up your relationship, suggest you're acting out of jealousy or revenge. They might even try to paint you as unstable. I'm not worried about me, I told her. I'm worried about the girls. They've been through so much already. Josephine assured me the girls would be protected during their testimony, able to speak from another room via video if necessary. But I still worried. Theodore had proven how far his reach extended. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Theodore's face when they arrested him at the cottage. That look of pure hatred, the silent promise of revenge. What if his intimidation worked? What if one of the girls was too scared to testify? Morning came too quickly. 2 police officers escorted Dad and me to the courthouse in an unmarked car. The building was swarming with security, which should have made me feel safer but somehow only heightened my anxiety. As we walked toward the courtroom, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Vanessa, my former coworker. She quickly looked away when our eyes met. Was she here for Theodore? How many others had he manipulated? Inside the courtroom, I finally saw Theodore again. He was wearing a suit, his hair neatly combed, looking for all the world like a respectable businessman instead of the monster I knew him to be. He smiled at me, actually smiled, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. I felt sick but forced myself to look straight ahead. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me afraid. The hearing began with opening statements. Theodore's lawyer, a slick guy named Raymond Brooks, painted him as a misunderstood volunteer who worked with troubled youth. He suggested the girls had misinterpreted innocent affection, that Dad and I had jumped to conclusions due to relationship problems. When it was my turn to testify, I felt surprisingly calm. I told the truth, simply and clearly. About finding the bracelet and lipgloss. About the drawing signed by Lily. About following Theodore to the cabin and what I saw there. Raymond's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned my motives, suggested I was jealous of Theodore's volunteer work, even implied I had mental health issues that made me paranoid. "Isn't it true," he asked with a smug smile, "that you've been experiencing delusions? That you've been making accusations against multiple people in your workplace?" "No," I said firmly. "Those rumors were spread by Theodore's friends to discredit me." "Do you have any proof of that?" I didn't, not really. Just my word against theirs. When Dad testified about the break-in at his house, Raymond suggested it was just a random burglary, unrelated to Theodore. When Detective Martinez presented the evidence from the cameras, Raymond argued they had been placed legally, with my father's authorization since he owned the property. He explained that my dad had installed security cameras in all his rental properties after a break-in at another location the previous year. The footage had been instrumental in proving Theodore's guilt beyond any doubt. By the end of the day, I was exhausted and discouraged. Theodore looked confident, exchanging whispers with his lawyer. Had we done enough? Would the judge see through his act? The next day was even harder. The girls testified via video, their faces blurred to protect their identities. Lily went first, her voice small but steady as she described how Theodore had approached her at the soup kitchen, where he actually did volunteer occasionally. How he had gained her trust, then started taking her to special places where they could be alone. Zoe, Mia, and Emma told similar stories. Theodore had found them all at places where vulnerable children might be: community centers, after-school programs, soup kitchens. He had posed as a caring mentor, someone who wanted to help them. Then slowly, methodically, he had isolated them from others and begun the abuse. Raymond's cross-examination of the girls was limited by the judge, but he still managed to suggest they might be confused about what happened, or that they had been coached by the prosecution. The final witness was a surprise: a young woman named Jackie, maybe 20 years old. She approached the stand looking nervous but determined. "I was one of Theodore's victims 10 years ago," she testified. "I was 8 when he started grooming me. He was a volunteer at my elementary school." Jackie explained that she had seen Theodore's arrest on the local news and had come forward immediately. She described a pattern identical to what the younger girls had experienced: the grooming, the isolation, the abuse. "I never told anyone until now," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I was too ashamed, too scared. But I couldn't stay silent anymore, not when I knew there were other girls." Raymond tried to discredit Jackie too, suggesting she was seeking attention or financial gain. But her testimony was powerful, showing Theodore's pattern of behavior over many years. The hearing concluded with closing arguments. Josephine emphasized the overwhelming evidence against Theodore, the testimony of multiple victims, the video evidence, the pattern of behavior. Raymond argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that Theodore was being persecuted for trying to help troubled children. The judge took only 30 minutes to decide there was more than enough evidence to proceed to trial. Theodore would remain in custody, denied bail due to the risk of witness intimidation and flight. It should have felt like a victory, but I knew it was just the beginning. The trial itself wouldn't start for months, giving Theodore plenty of time to continue his campaign against us. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us. Dad shielded me as best he could, but their questions still reached my ears. Is it true you fabricated evidence against your boyfriend? Sources say you have a history of mental illness. Can you comment? Did you set Theodore up because he was planning to leave you? Theodore's smear campaign had reached the media. I kept my head down and pushed through the crowd to our waiting car. That night, back at the hotel, I received a text from an unknown number. This is just the beginning. By the time the trial starts, no one will believe a word you say. I showed it to Martinez, who added it to the growing file of harassment evidence. She looked worried. We need to be prepared for things to get worse before they get better. She was right. Over the next few weeks, the intimidation tactics became more sophisticated. Someone hacked my email and social media accounts, sending inappropriate messages to everyone in my contact list. My old boss received emails supposedly from me, threatening him and his family. The local newspaper ran a story questioning my credibility, citing anonymous sources close to the case. Photos appeared online of me at parties from years ago, doctored to make it look like I was doing substances or acting promiscuously. Dad was targeted too. Anonymous complaints were filed against his rental properties, triggering inspections and temporary shutdowns. His business reputation, built over decades, was being systematically attacked. We fought back as best we could. Martinez helped us document everything for additional charges against Theodore. Dad hired a cybersecurity expert to secure our accounts and trace the attacks. Josephine prepared motions to prevent character assassination during the trial. But it was exhausting. Every day brought a new attack, a new angle we hadn't anticipated. Theodore's network was extensive and determined. Then, about 2 months after the hearing, we got an unexpected break. One of Theodore's friends, a guy named Kyle, was arrested for the break-in at Dad's house. His fingerprints matched those found on a window frame. Under questioning, Kyle revealed that Theodore had been coordinating everything from jail, using a contraband cell phone smuggled in by a guard he had bribed. The guard was identified and arrested, the phone confiscated. On it were messages between Theodore and at least a dozen people, detailing the harassment campaign against us. There were also messages to other potential victims, girls he had been grooming before his arrest. It was the break we needed. Theodore was transferred to a higher security facility, his communications strictly monitored. Many of his friends were charged as accessories. The intimidation didn't stop completely, but it decreased significantly. As the trial date approached, I started to feel cautiously optimistic. We had survived Theodore's worst attempts to silence us. The evidence against him was stronger than ever. Justice for Lily, Zoe, Mia, Emma, Jackie, and who knew how many others was within reach. But I had underestimated Theodore's desperation. 3 days before the trial was set to begin, I received a call from Detective Martinez. Victoria, I need you and your dad to come to the station right away. There's been a development. When we arrived, Martinez led us to a private room. Theodore has made an offer through his lawyer, she explained. He's willing to plead guilty to reduced charges if you agree not to testify. Reduced charges? Dad asked, his voice rising. After everything he's done? Martinez looked uncomfortable. He'd still serve time, but significantly less than if he's convicted on all counts. Why would we ever agree to that? I asked. Martinez hesitated. He's threatening to release certain materials, videos he claims to have made of you during your relationship, without your knowledge. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. We lived together. I would have known. He says they were taken when you were sleeping, or in the shower. We don't know if he's bluffing, but his lawyer seems confident. I felt violated all over again. Had Theodore been filming me in our most intimate moments? The thought made me physically ill. This is blackmail, Dad said angrily. Can't you charge him for that too? We can try, Martinez said. But the damage would already be done. Once those kinds of videos are online, they're almost impossible to completely remove. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new threat. Theodore knew exactly how to hurt me, how to make me question everything. You don't have to decide right now, Martinez said gently. But the prosecution needs an answer by tomorrow morning. Dad and I went home to discuss it. I was torn between rage and fear. The thought of those videos becoming public was horrifying. But the thought of Theodore getting a lighter sentence, potentially being free to hurt other girls in just a few years, was even worse. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," Dad told me. "But remember, this threat shows just how desperate he is. He knows he can't win in court." I barely slept that night, weighing my options. By morning, I had made my decision. I called Martinez. "Tell the prosecution I'm testifying," I said firmly. "I won't be blackmailed." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Once the trial starts, he might follow through on his threat." "I'm sure," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Those girls deserve justice, and Theodore needs to be stopped, no matter what it costs me." Martinez was silent for a moment. "You're very brave, Victoria. We'll do everything we can to protect you." The day the trial began, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Whatever Theodore had planned, whatever he might release, I couldn't control it. All I could control was my own testimony, my own truth. Dad and I arrived at the courthouse early, escorted by officers. The security was even tighter than before. As we walked in, I spotted Lily's parents in the hallway. They nodded to me, their eyes full of gratitude. That simple acknowledgement strengthened my resolve. Inside the courtroom, Theodore looked different. The confident smile was gone, replaced by a tense, calculating expression. He watched me closely as I took my seat, as if trying to determine if his threat had worked. The trial began with opening statements. This time, Theodore's new lawyer, a woman named Christina Powell, took a different approach. Instead of denying the allegations, she suggested Theodore had a sickness, that he needed help rather than punishment. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my head held high. Christina's cross-examination was even more aggressive than Raymond's had been. "Ms. Jackson, isn't it true that you were jealous of the time Mr. Howard spent volunteering with children?" "No," I replied calmly. "I was suspicious because his behavior changed suddenly and dramatically." "And you decided to spy on him rather than having an honest conversation?" "I tried having honest conversations. He lied repeatedly." She pressed on, trying to paint me as obsessive, unstable, vindictive. But I remained calm, sticking to the facts. When she hinted at the existence of private videos, I didn't flinch. "Ms. Powell, if such videos exist, they were taken without my knowledge or consent, which is itself a crime. But they don't change what I saw at that cabin." The girls testified next, their stories consistent and heartbreaking. Jackie returned to testify as well, along with 2 more women who had come forward after seeing the news coverage, all former victims of Theodore from years past. The evidence was overwhelming. The videos from the security cameras my dad had installed in his rental properties, the messages on Theodore's contraband phone, the testimony of so many victims spanning a decade. Throughout it all, I waited for the other shoe to drop, for Theodore to follow through on his threat. Each day I checked online anxiously, expecting to find my most private moments exposed to the world. But nothing happened. Either the videos didn't exist, or Theodore had realized they would only add to his charges. After 2 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty on all counts. As the judge read out the verdict, I watched Theodore's face. The mask finally slipped completely, revealing the monster beneath. His eyes burned with hatred as he looked at me, but I didn't look away. He had no power over me anymore. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, Theodore was held without bail, his communications strictly monitored. The harassment stopped completely. Life slowly began to return to normal. I found a new job at a company owned by one of Dad's friends. I started therapy to process everything that had happened. I even went on a few dates, though it was hard to trust again after Theodore. The day of the sentencing hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed with supporters, not just for me, but for all of Theodore's victims. Lily and her family were there. So were Zoe, Mia, Emma, Jackie, and the other women who had testified. Theodore sat stone-faced as the judge delivered his sentence. 30 years without possibility of parole, followed by lifetime registration as a SX offender and strict monitoring if he was ever released. It wasn't forever, but it was enough. Theodore would be an old man before he had another chance to hurt a child. As they led him away, Theodore looked back at me one last time. I thought he might threaten me again, or curse me. Instead, he just looked defeated. His network had been dismantled, his tactics exposed, his crimes laid bare for all to see. Outside the courthouse, I hugged Lily's parents, who thanked me through tears for helping save their daughter. I hugged Dad, who had stood by me through everything. And for the first time in months, I felt truly safe. The road to recovery wouldn't be easy. The trauma of what Theodore had done, to me, to those girls, to everyone in his path, would take time to heal. But we had won. Justice had been served. As Dad and I walked to the car, he put his arm around my shoulders. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "You didn't let him win, no matter what he threw at you." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," he replied. "You're stronger than you know." Maybe he was right. Through all of Theodore's manipulation, threats, and attempts to silence me, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. And because of that, Theodore would never hurt another child again. But life after the trial wasn't the clean slate I'd hoped for. About 2 weeks after sentencing, I was grocery shopping when a woman approached me in the produce section. She looked normal enough, maybe mid-30s, dressed in yoga pants and a hoodie. "You're Victoria, right?" she asked, her voice friendly. I nodded cautiously, balancing an apple in my hand. Her smile vanished instantly. "You ruined Theodore's life with your lies," she hissed. "He helped those girls. They needed him." I dropped the apple, backing away. "You need to leave me alone." "We're watching you," she said, then turned and walked away like nothing had happened. I abandoned my cart and practically ran to my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I called Martinez as soon as I got home. "We can file another report," she said, sounding tired. But unless she made a specific threat, I knew the drill by now. Theodore might be in prison, but his supporters were still out there. People he'd manipulated into believing his lies. People who thought I was the villain. Dad suggested I move in with him permanently, but I refused. I couldn't live in fear forever. Instead, I got a new security system, changed my routines, and started taking self-defense classes. Small steps toward reclaiming my life. The nightmares were the worst part. I'd wake up gasping, convinced Theodore was standing over my bed. Sometimes I dreamed about the cabin, about what might have happened if we'd arrived too late. Other times I dreamed about the girls, their faces blending together in my mind. My therapist, Dr. Patel, said the dreams were normal. "Your brain is processing trauma," she explained during one session. "Give it time." Time. Everyone kept telling me to give it time. But how much time does it take to forget the image of a grown man with a child? How many years until I stopped flinching when someone approached me unexpectedly? 3 months after the sentencing, I got a letter from the prison. Theodore had written to me. I stared at the envelope for a long time before calling Martinez. "You don't have to read it," she said. "I can take it as evidence of continued harassment." But curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what he could possibly have to say. The letter was short, just 3 sentences. "I forgive you for what you did to me. I'm getting help now. When I get out, I'll find you so we can talk properly." I felt sick reading it. Even now, he was trying to manipulate me, to make me doubt myself. And that last line, was it a threat? Martinez thought so. She added the letter to Theodore's file and had his prison privileges restricted. Life went on. I focused on work, on rebuilding friendships that had fractured during the trial. Some people never came back into my life. They'd believed Theodore's lies, or maybe they just couldn't handle the darkness of what had happened. But others stood by me, and I made new friends too. Dad and I grew closer than ever. He'd always been protective, but now he understood why. We had both seen the worst of humanity, and we'd faced it together. 6 months after the sentencing, I got a call from Martinez. "Theodore was attacked in prison," she said without preamble. "He's in the hospital." My stomach dropped. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Multiple stab wounds. They're not sure if he'll make it." I sat down hard, unsure how to feel. Should I be happy? Relieved? I felt neither. Just numb. Apparently word got around about his crimes, Martinez continued. Child predators don't do well in prison. I thanked her for letting me know and hung up. Then I sat on my couch for hours, staring at nothing. I didn't want Theodore dead. I wanted him to serve his time, to never hurt another child. But I couldn't pretend to be sad about his suffering either. Theodore survived the attack, but barely. He spent weeks in the prison hospital before being transferred to solitary confinement for his protection. Martinez kept me updated, knowing I needed the information to feel safe. Life settled into a new normal. I dated occasionally, though I was upfront about my trust issues. Most guys couldn't handle my story, but I didn't blame them. It was a lot to take on. Almost a year after the trial, I was leaving work when I spotted a familiar face in the parking lot. Lily's mom, Carol, was leaning against my car. Sorry to ambush you, she said as I approached. I got your work address from Detective Martinez. I hope that's okay. I nodded, suddenly nervous. Is everything all right? Is Lily okay? Carol smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Lily's doing really well, actually. That's why I wanted to see you. She's been asking about you. We went for coffee, and Carol showed me pictures on her phone. Lily looked different, older, happier. She was in therapy, Carol explained, and it was helping. She'd even joined a soccer team. She calls you her guardian angel, Carol said, her voice thick with emotion. She wanted me to give you this. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a drawing, not like the one I'd found in Theodore's backpack, but a bright, colorful picture of a woman with long hair standing next to a little girl. At the bottom, Lily had written, "Thank you for saving me." I cried right there in the coffee shop, not caring who saw. It was the first time I'd felt like any of this had been worth it. Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We're moving next month, she said. Fresh start. But Lily wanted you to know that she's okay, and that she'll never forget what you did for her. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The next morning, I woke to a text from Martinez. Need to talk. Can you come to the station today? My stomach knotted with anxiety. Had something happened with Theodore? Was he trying to appeal his sentence? Martinez looked serious when I arrived at her office. We've been investigating Theodore's network, she explained. The people who helped him, who may have known about the abuse. I nodded, waiting for the bad news. One name keeps coming up, she continued, sliding a folder across her desk. Someone who might have been more involved than we initially thought. I opened the folder and froze. Inside was a photo of the woman who had confronted me at the grocery store months ago. According to the file, her name was Bethany Howard. Howard? I looked up, confused. Is she related to Theodore? Martinez nodded grimly. His sister. She's been visiting him regularly in prison, and we have reason to believe she may have helped him access victims. The implications hit me like a truck. Had Bethany known what her brother was doing to those girls? Had she helped him? We're bringing her in for questioning, Martinez assured me. But I wanted to warn you first. This might stir things up again. She was right. The news that Theodore had an accomplice made headlines in the local paper. Suddenly people were talking about the case again, rehashing details I'd tried to put behind me. Bethany denied everything, of course. But the evidence against her was mounting. Text messages between her and Theodore, witness statements placing her at locations where he'd met some of the girls, and most damning of all, a storage unit rented in her name containing children's clothing, toys, and more disturbing drawings. A new trial date was set, this time with Bethany as the defendant. I would have to testify again, reliving everything I'd been trying to forget. The night before the preliminary hearing, I got a call from Martinez. Victoria, I need you to come to the station right away. There's been a development. My heart raced as I drove to the police station. What now? Had Bethany fled? Had Theodore somehow gotten out? Martinez met me in the lobby, her expression unreadable. Before I tell you what's happened, I need you to prepare yourself. This is going to be difficult to hear. She led me to a small conference room where Dad was already waiting, looking pale and worried. A man I didn't recognize sat across from him, tall, balding, in an expensive suit. This is Alan Brooks from the FBI, Martinez said, closing the door behind us. He's been investigating a network of child predators that we believe Theodore and Bethany were part of. My mouth went dry. A network? You mean there are more of them? Alan nodded solemnly. We've been tracking this group for over a year. Theodore Howard was on our radar before you ever came forward. I sat down heavily, trying to process this. So you knew? You knew what he was doing to those girls? We suspected, Alan clarified. But we didn't have enough evidence to make arrests. We were building a case against the entire network. And now? Dad asked, his voice tight with anger. Thanks to the evidence collected during Theodore's trial and the new evidence against Bethany, we've identified several other members of the network. We're preparing to make multiple arrests. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt sick. How many children had suffered while the FBI built their case? How many could have been saved if they'd moved sooner? We need your help, Victoria, Alan continued. Your testimony against Bethany could help us bring down the entire network. I looked at Martinez, who nodded encouragingly. You don't have to decide right now, she said, but this could help protect countless children. I thought about Lily's drawing, about her calling me her guardian angel. I thought about Zoe, Mia, Emma, and all the other girls whose lives had been shattered by Theodore and people like him. I'll do it, I said firmly. Whatever you need. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with prosecutors, FBI agents, and victim advocates. I learned more about the network than I ever wanted to know: how they communicated, how they shared victims, how they protected each other. Bethany's trial was postponed while the FBI built their larger case. I was both relieved and frustrated by the delay. Part of me wanted to get it over with, to say my piece and move on, but I understood the importance of doing this right. 2 months later, the arrests began. 7 people in total, including Bethany. The charges were extensive: child exploitation, trafficking, production of child sexual abuse material. The evidence was overwhelming. I watched the news coverage with mixed emotions: relief that these predators were being stopped, horror at the scale of their crimes, and underneath it all, a nagging question: would this really be the end? The answer came 3 days later when I received a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? This isn't over. I forwarded it to Martinez immediately, my hands shaking. She called within minutes. We're tracing the number, she assured me. In the meantime, don't go home. Go to your dad's house. I'll send a patrol car. I did as she said, throwing some clothes into a bag and driving straight to Dad's. He was waiting on the porch, his face grim. Martinez called me, he said, hugging me tight. You're staying here until they find whoever sent that text. I nodded against his shoulder, too exhausted to argue. Would this nightmare ever truly end? The patrol car arrived shortly after I did, parking across the street from Dad's house. It was a small comfort, knowing someone was watching over us. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every distant car engine had me sitting up in bed, heart racing. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs for some water. As I stood in the dark kitchen, a movement outside the window caught my eye. A shadow moving across the yard. I froze, watching as it approached the back door. I backed away slowly, reaching for my phone. But before I could call for help, I heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Someone was breaking in. I ran for the stairs, phone in hand, dialing 911 as I went. Someone's breaking into my father's house, I whispered to the dispatcher. There's a patrol car outside, but I don't think they've seen anything. Stay on the line, the dispatcher instructed. Officers are being notified. I made it to Dad's room, shaking him awake. Someone's in the house, I hissed. Dad was instantly alert, reaching for the baseball bat he kept beside his bed. Stay behind me, he whispered, moving toward the door. We could hear footsteps downstairs moving through the kitchen, then the creak of the stairs. Dad positioned himself in the hallway, bat raised. I stood in the bedroom doorway, phone still pressed to my ear, heart pounding so loud I was sure the intruder could hear it. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. In the dim light, I couldn't make out their face, but I could see they were holding something. A knife? A GN? Dad didn't hesitate. He swung the bat, connecting with the intruder's arm. There was a cry of pain, and whatever they'd been holding clattered to the floor. The intruder lunged at Dad, tackling him to the ground. They struggled in the hallway, grunting and thrashing. I stood frozen, useless, until I heard sirens approaching. "The police are coming," I shouted. The intruder looked up, and in that moment, I saw their face. It was a man I didn't recognize, young with a shaved head and wild eyes. He scrambled off Dad and ran for the stairs. Dad tried to grab his leg but missed. We heard him thundering down the steps, then the crash of the front door being thrown open. The patrol officers were already out of their car, weapons drawn. "Stop! Police!" one shouted. But the intruder kept running, disappearing into the darkness between houses. Dad and I sat on the porch, shaken but unharmed, as more police arrived. The house was searched, evidence collected. The intruder had dropped a knife in the hallway, long, sharp, clearly meant to do harm. "He was here to call us," I said quietly to Martinez when she arrived. "Wasn't he?" She didn't sugarcoat it. "It looks that way. But we'll find him, Victoria. I promise." They did find him, 3 days later, trying to leave the state. His name was Jason Taylor, and he had connections to Bethany Howard. Text messages on his phone proved she had ordered the attack from jail, promising payment from a hidden account. New charges were filed against Bethany. Jason took a plea deal, giving up information about the network in exchange for a reduced sentence. One by one, the pieces of Theodore's world were falling apart. I stayed at Dad's house for another week, until we were sure there were no more threats. Then, reluctantly, I went back to my apartment. It didn't feel like home anymore. Nowhere did, really. But I couldn't hide forever. The trials began a month later. First Bethany, then the others. I testified at each one, telling my story over and over until the words felt hollow in my mouth. But it worked. One by one, they were convicted, sentenced to decades in prison. Theodore, still in solitary confinement, was charged with additional crimes based on new evidence. His sentence was extended, ensuring he would never walk free again. As the last trial concluded, Martinez pulled me aside. "It's over, Victoria. Really over this time. They're all going away for a very long time." I nodded, wanting to believe her. "What about their supporters? The people who confronted me, who sent threats?" "Most of them have gone quiet since the arrests. Without Theodore and Bethany directing them, they've lost their focus." She squeezed my arm gently. "You can start living your life again." Living my life. It sounded so simple, yet so impossible. Who was I now, after everything that had happened? The woman who had loved Theodore was gone. In her place was someone harder, warier, but stronger too. I started small. I went back to work. I had dinner with friends. I visited Lily and her family before they moved away, promising to stay in touch. I helped Dad renovate his kitchen, a project we'd talked about for years. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent. I could go days, sometimes weeks, without thinking about Theodore. The woman in the grocery store faded from my memory, replaced by ordinary interactions with ordinary people. 6 months after the last trial, I met someone. His name was Michael, and he was kind and patient and understood when I needed space. On our third date, I told him everything. He listened without judgment, then thanked me for trusting him with my story. A year after Theodore's sentencing, I received a letter from the prison. For a moment, panic gripped me. Was it from him? But the return address was different. Inside was a short note from a prison guard. "Theodore Howard died last night. Heart attack. Thought you should know." I sat with the letter for a long time, trying to identify what I felt. Not joy, not exactly. Relief, maybe. Closure. The certainty that he could never hurt anyone again. I called Martinez, then Dad. They both offered to come over, but I told them I was okay. And surprisingly, I was. Theodore no longer had power over me, in life or in death. That night, I dreamed of the cabin. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I walked through the door confidently, gathered the children, and led them into the sunlight. They were safe. We all were. When I woke, I felt lighter somehow. The weight I'd carried for so long had finally begun to lift. Theodore was gone. His network was dismantled. The children he had hurt were healing, moving forward with their lives. And so was I. I still have moments of fear, of course. Days when a stranger's glance makes my heart race, or when a sound in the night has me reaching for my phone. But those moments are fewer now, and less overwhelming when they come. I've started volunteering at a children's advocacy center, helping kids who have experienced trauma. It feels right, using my experience to make a difference, to turn something horrible into something helpful. Dad says he's proud of me, but I think he's the one who deserves the credit. He believed me when others didn't. He stood by me through everything. He taught me that sometimes the people who seem perfect are anything but, and that the truth, however painful, is always worth fighting for. As for Theodore, I try not to think about him much anymore. He doesn't deserve space in my thoughts. Instead, I think about Lily, about her drawing and her soccer team, and her second chance at childhood. I think about all the children who won't become his victims because we stopped him. That's the story I choose to tell myself now. Not about what I lost, but about what was saved. Not about Theodore's darkness, but about the light that came after. It's not a perfect ending. There are still scars, still moments of doubt and fear, but it's my ending, on my terms. And after everything, that feels like victory enough.